Now it's time to call the rest of the speakers to the stage. So I would start by calling Deborah Lawler-Dormer from the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences. Thank you for coming. I will also like to call Julie Sauret, Chaire of Arts and Sciences, Claudio Serni from University of Bologna, and Guy van Belle from UGENT.
The clicker, I think.
Who's first? Oh, we're in a panel together. Nice. Are you first?
And before going on further discussions and questions, I would give the floor to the speakers, and I would start by Deborah, and then follow to Julie, Claudio, and Guy. Okay, the floor is yours, Deborah.
Okay. Hi everyone, it's been a real privilege being here actually. I feel like it's a very kind of pertinent moment, and it's been very stimulating and brought a lot of really interesting ideas as I've been listening to everyone. So the Museum of Applied Arts is in Sydney in Australia, and it spans across a number of different venues. So it has the Powerhouse Museum, which has a collection of around 500,000 objects spanning science, technology and applied arts disciplines. And it also has the Museum Discovery Centre, which is where a lot of the collection is housed, and it has the Sydney Observatory as well, which we do quite a lot of astronomy and various other applications there. And my job doesn't actually have a team of researchers. I'm working more like a broker or a facilitator who works across all of those different venues, across the different disciplines within the museum, and then out to all of the education and industry partners, brokering projects around specific research themes. So there's a number of different platforms under which that happens. So one of those is the Visiting Research Fellowship Program, which is actually described in the program notes. And this year we will have 7 Visiting Research Fellows. They come in usually for around a 2-month period, and their projects are really diverse and they work with across the teams of the museum. So sometimes they are working with archives or with particular collection objects. Sometimes they are working with a chemistry problem, in which case they might be in the conservation department, and also digital or learning or education. So we have this kind of vast sort of diverse kind of population moving in and out of the museum. And connected to that is also a new creative residency program, which is where local creatives are at reduced rates are hiring some space in the museum where they're practicing, and they also, as part of that, get access to curatorial and public programs and to the collections so that they can use the resources of the museum to inspire new work. So that is happening at the moment. And the other project that I do a lot of work on is brokering these partnerships, and one of the key areas of that is called it's under the frameworks of the ARC, Australian Research Council linkage grants, which is where we partner with universities around a particular problem, and then we put in a bid, a shared bid, and if we are successful, that money then pays for 3 years of research to explore that problem. Those problems are always explored in transdisciplinary ways. Sometimes those problems are quite large and they will involve multiple universities to try to resolve those. And so there's quite a diverse area of action, sometimes quite schizophrenic to actually be doing it. I've got on the screen here one of the results from one of the Artists in Residence projects, which was by Dr. Oliver Byrne, who came into the organisation inspired by the Master Touch collection, which is a very large collection that we hold around the manufacturing of automated pianos. And he then went on to explore through the archives documentaries that were made around the factory just before its closure in Sydney. And he took this collection of pianos into a collaborative work with a jazz ensemble and a interactive media lab, and developed these new interactive devices that you can see. So this is kind of more like an art and technology music project, and created a distributed sound installation that was really kind of exploring the notion of what automation might look like today. And as a sort of very, very kind of playful but essentially very beautiful installation, which obviously you can't experience, but you can walk around, and it had AR and AI components to it, and the different elements of the installation played in a sequential spiral motion. This project, I think, for me is kind of interesting because it deals to some of the challenges that are in the environment, which is around this notion of iteration, that when someone comes into the organisation, whether they're an engineer or a scientist or an artist, that their work is likely to be iterative. And so with Ollie, these interactive devices were built. They've then been taken back onto the university campus, and the Interactive Media Lab, which has quite a large student population, are now working with these devices and reprogramming them and running a series of experiments, and that will happen until June of this year. And then after that, the devices come back into the museum, and they will be installed in a different space in the organisation, which is in the education area, in an area called the lab. And in that space, we will then be interacting with school groups and university groups around interactive sound and coding and programming in relation to those units. Can you... No? Sorry, wrong one. So the one of the other projects, which is just recent, is by Dr. Anna Raupak, who actually was inspired by the handwritten notebooks of women in apostrophe human computers, who worked on mapping the sky for the astrographic catalogue of stars that's held in the Mays collection. And she's developing a work. She's actually developing 3 different works, and this is just one strand. But this strand is around looking at the side notes and the handwritten calculations that women did who were documenting sums and calculations that were done in relation to the astrographic catalogue of stars. And what she's trying to do is actually acknowledge the way that the labour, knowledge, narratives and lives of the woman observers sort of gets made visible, because it's not very visible. And she's basically going to start to merge these personal life stories, scientific endeavour, woman in science, and the abstract notions of time and space in relation to the universe. So this is a current work, and this is a test photograph, a photograph of a test installation as part of her working process, but 3 works will come out of that particular initiative. And the final slide.
Deborah, 1 minute, please.
1 minute. The final slide is that the museum is actually in a very large moment of change. It has been given the challenge of moving the organisation to a 4th venue, which will be on the banks of the Parramatta River in Western Sydney, with a large new museum costing around $1 to $1.5 billion. So it's quite contentious in Australia. And part of that will contain a 2-level residential area, which will contain 60 residential suites. and there will be kind of more like a village of multi-tiered ways that we'll be working with multidisciplinary community to create new works, seeing that practice as iterative, drawing on both the community, the ideas across the organisation, the archives and the collection, and basically putting it all to work in the creation of new ideas, new processes and new works.
Thank you.
So I think that's it. Thanks.
Julie, I would go to you now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, hello everyone. Just I have to.
Yeah, he's preparing now. Yeah, okay. Yeah,
So,
that's it.
so hello everyone. I'm
Microphone, or if you prefer.
better like that. No, it's okay. I'm the project coordinator and communication manager at Chaire Art and Science, which is a joint program funded in 2017 between an engineer school, École Polytechnique, an art and design school, École des Arts Décoratifs, and supported by the Daniel and Nina Carasso Foundation. They are not only our supporters, but also the third partner of this program. And the idea of the Carasso Foundation was that now, like, there is no more independent scientists and even self-educated artists. Many of them do art school and are in a specific network. So are to innovate. And artists and scientists can share a mission of enlighters that can lead to innovation if we make them a space which can be collaborative and useful for innovative or new programs. So basically, our main themes of intervention are linked to our interdependence to environment, climatic environment, with works about plants, trees, water, and also technological environment, mainly soft robotics and interaction design. And our second axis of intervention are inventing or trying to imagine new formats to present this art design science project. Because maybe the fact that we have a design school can help to make links between artists and scientists in many ways. So, as our panel is about supporting next generation, because one aim of the chair is to change the institutions and also try to change the new generation and to train them to be more innovative or to go out of the box, as it has been said a lot. So recently, 6 months ago, we organized our first art and science summer school in École Polytechnique, which was a first idea to make almost 20 students from 11 different countries come for a long week symposium, working in 5 different workshops, which were set in the Polytechnic labs. So, and they had 20 supervisors, scientists from Polytechnique, and also some artists and designers from École des Arts Déco, or from our partners, international partners. It was organized mainly with UC Davis, but also with UCLA. Victoria Vesna was one of the supervisors, UC Irvine, and Cambridge University. And the idea of this long week symposium was a bet, in a way, like gathering all these students, MA students and PhD students, 1/3 artists, 1/3 working in humanities, philosopher, anthropologist, and 1/3 scientists, mainly physicists and biologists. And the bet was, let's try to imagine new narratives about climate change by working with measurement tools. So, for example, we work in the department of the atmospheric observatory at Polytechnique, but also in the physics department. And it was about climate measurement, microclimate of 3D, 4D printings. And 1 week was very short. So basically, we had an intensive program. It was workshop, then conference in the early afternoon, then workshop. And then at the end of every day, in terms of methodology, it worked very, very well to have a meeting and each group was explaining and documenting what they have been doing during the days. So little by little, every day they could see what was going on, and what at first was exploration and maybe games with the 3D printers, and let's see what we can have. There was also a small exhibition on the Friday, so they had to think in advance about what they could present, and so it was an whole working process during the week, and just at the end, some very interesting projects happened. I could develop that after, but for example, the 3D 4D printing group. It was they presented data materialization with pasta, so it can seem funny in a way, but then one designer thought about doing this same materialization with a little table printed in 4D, and now it has been developed within a real design table that could evolve during a debate to show the words that are used during a debate. Enfin, different projects like that can start from a very funny moment like that, and then it happens to create things. 1 minute. So sorry, I'm very talkative. So hors d'oeuvre poster brunch. I wanted to show an example of another format of presenting art and science, art design science collaborative project. So the scientific poster session. Sometimes it can be a little boring, or it's always the same poster and scientists present their research. We imagine having a brunch to share a meal with public. So it was to a larger audience, not only students, but there were many students or young people coming, or families coming on a Sunday. And we imagine tables that can be both support for poster, and then we invest them to have our brunch on them, and 7 duos of artists and scientists, or designer and scientists, were talking to 10 people around the table, explaining their research by presenting step by step some elements of their research. And at the end of the meal, tables are turned upside down again, and then everybody can go around and talk about the project with the people. Okay, thanks for listening.
Thank you. Next we have Claudio.
Okay. Hello everyone, I'm Claudio Serni from University of Bologna. I've been dealing with art, science, technology projects and research for about 5 years. Today I'd like to share with you my experience about a specific project called FAST, Florence Art, Science and Technology, a project that I managed when I worked at the University of Florence. The project was born from a collaboration between the Academy of Fine Arts in Florence and the University of Florence. It stems from the desire to create in Florence a place where art, science and technology can meet. And officially, it started the first edition in June of 2018, and it finished in September last year. Okay, let's see. Here I just summarize the phases of the project. As I said, we start with an open call for students of fine arts and students from a university from different disciplines. And after that, we organized the visits for in the laboratories of the university. We had a wide range of laboratory of disciplines, laboratory of biology, laboratory of architecture, laboratory of clinical medicine, and others. And after the visits, I can say that to the call applied for more than 60 students. After I held a workshop to discuss with the students about the contemporary art and how contemporary art interacts with technologies and science. And also some way to help their inspiration by comparison with international examples. And in fact, the students have to write a proposal, an artwork proposal related to the visited laboratories. And we selected the proposal, and the authors of the proposal had the chance to go to the laboratory another time to meet again the research and to discuss with them about their proposals, about their idea, and also in some cases to adjust a bit the idea, the project, in order to meet the science, to meet the technology, the possibility of the technology to realize the artwork. And then we meeting, and then the proposal, we selected the artworks, and the artworks, 13 artworks that we showed in exhibition in Florence in 2019 in September, in occasion of the European Research Night. And we just the exhibition, just a few photos from the exhibition. We had a different kind of artistic works. We had the videos, we had performances, we had also paintings and so on. So that's just that's all.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, my name is Guy van Belle, and I have a very schizophrenic life because I'm an artist and I work at the university, which, and on top of that, I do a couple of other things, of course, as well, like everyone. But to start with, my artistic career was always very much, let's say, compatible with the other parts of what I did. And I never see it actually as a job. I like to do the things, and that's maybe the best of it all. There's one difference. I don't do smart cities and things like that because I'm mostly interested in countryside rural development as the future. Since we are going to talk about the future, the rural development, I think, is the way to go, not the city, because they create just more problems. Yes, anyway. So I think I'm a very old guy, so I went probably through all the different ways of technology that came around. And the place where I'm working now is called IPEM, and the original thing is Institute for Psychoacoustics and Electronic Music, and it was started in 1965 with, maybe you know, Karel Goeyvaerts, and there's a couple of other composers, but basically the place was started by university, by engineering, and by the radio, the official state radio. And what they did is actually the state radio provided a wage for the composers to be there. That's how hotels came and so on. And some equipment, and university provided the scientists and the technicians. So it's a very old story, like we all know, art science. And it was a production studio, basically. Because what they did, they produced most of the electronics, like the tunes for the news, but also they were having 2 weekly programs of an hour of contemporary and electronic music, which part of it was produced at their studios or elsewhere around the world, mainly in Europe. But that changed, and it's very interesting how it changed. Yeah, I was as a student of literature, very ignorant of the rest of the world, and I was attracted by the sign on the door. It's quite impressive if you have to read as a young guy, institutes. And so this guy came out and he said, I work here, I'll show you the place. And so that's how I ended up staying there, making my first tape music. Yes. So by 1977, they bought this very, what is now a rare computer, EMS, the Synthi 100, which you might know from Doctor Who. BBC had one too, they made the music on it. A huge thing, it doesn't fit on this table. So it's huge, it's like somebody's kitchen furniture somehow. But also like Stockhausen made Sirius on it. And now there's only 5 left, I think, 5, 6 in public spaces. One we have, Belgrade has one, Cuenca, University of Cuenca in Spain has one. And then there's one in Athens, in the old studio of Xenakis that became part of Conservatorium. And so actually, what happened with it, and I think it's interesting to talk about the future, what happened to these studios, there were several ones everywhere around the world. And by I think the middle of the 80s, they became completely a bit useless. Since, it's the wave of the new electronic instruments came that were cheap. Before that, they were very expensive, they were cheap. Personal computers came. So most of these people who were creative in this domain, they switched to their home studios. Even the people recording things became very cheap. The whole phenomenon of home taping and things like that. And they created all small networks in which they would come together and create their own venues even for performing in. So by then, and that was also the fate of IPEM, by then also the radio and television thought, well, what are we maintaining? We have our own companies that can produce these things. And then they switched to becoming a research institute. This is a very important phenomenon if you look at it from the artistic point of view. So I think it was a good move to a research institute, and I'm going to jump to today. Now IPEM exists as a research, mainly a research institute, where they do research on music and embodied music, and so body and biofeedback on things. And for that reason, I worked there for a long time. First I had, at university I was asked, this is also something in the 90s, I was asked to, because the funding was declining on these projects that were called fundamental research, so you had to go very much into redefining this. And I was asked by cultural studies to do research projects on media and culture in education. Because at that time the impact of the digital technology was rising, and actually schools were pretty much behind it if you looked at the evolution of that point. Also an interesting point, you know. And so for like 10 years I did research, not only on what is media. For instance, I started actually, the first one was interesting because it was literature actually in education. It was when we did research in that, they were completely cut off from anything happening around them. It's an interesting area, which was done very badly and still is in education. So this, what? 1 minute. Okay. So in 2015, the city of Ghent built this new library. It's a complete new library, and university has 5 labs there which work together. It's the top floor, and we sit, this just one floor, and we sit together with data science, communication, so IPEM is there as musicology, and we work together on a couple of things. And there's also EMEC, which is the inter-university, it's not a company, but with nanotechnology, IoT, and all these kind of things. And -2, which is completely under the water, might be interesting for the future if the water comes in. But we have a huge lab there with about 80 speakers and also equipment for doing motion capturing, connected to it. Yes, And the old synthesizer is still there. So we have what we did over the last years. They asked me to because I did a couple of other things. They asked me to come back and maybe take care of the artists who wanted to work on it. And now we have these ad hoc artists who come in, and that can go from. We don't want to concentrate on. Maybe talk later about the role of education in all this, but we don't want to concentrate on because we have few students, but actually the students we teach to do research and experiments with biofeedback in cognitive and biology and things like that. And they go from local artists on electronics to we even had a jazz band who used the whole equipment for doing one of their video clips and things like that. So that's a bit the status of it. And now we start a new program, bringing, and it's one sentence only. We have a couple of new research programs coming. One is with exoskeletons. Another one is something very different with Alzheimer patients. And what we do is once that project gets on, the scientific project gets going, we do a little call to ask who of the artists is interested in following it and working together along the lines. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry for the time pressure, but I really want to explore further your ideas, and I guess the discussion will also be a shop floor for that. During the previous day and even this morning, we were talking about education, competences, skills, people, most of all people. And then I introduced the roundtable focusing on next generations towards people. And Andrew says, okay, but we should also see next generations not only from the people that will live in the future, but also the next generations of programs, initiatives, and so on. In here on stage, we have different initiatives promoted both by museums, universities, and foundations. And yesterday, during Greg's presentation, 4 competences were highlighted as crucial for anyone that intends to be involved in this domain. And those competences was curiosity, creativity, critical thinking, and communication. My question to all in the table is, how do you see your initiatives and your organizations supporting the development of these competences?
Since Artec is situated in a technical university, and quite honestly, we have a problem in recruiting in engineering. It's really dropping down. So how do we convince them to come back and to find out that engineering is important, because it's really important for industry, it's for a nation. So we've just recently put down a new committee, as that's a good university way of doing it, working on the future of technology education. And the future of technology education needs to bring back curiosity and creativity into their education, because it's always been there, and then it disappeared for some reason. It probably disappeared a little bit when everything became digital and the computer was the tool instead of all the other tools. So I think looking at the future of technical education, but also looking at the future of education in humanities, art, music, and architecture, needs to have the same drive towards creativity. And this is really, really happening at our university. They're very seriously considering it and have strong people working on it, and we are also involved through Artec.
I can just add something as well to that. At the Trondheim Academy of Fine Art, at NTNU there's this thing called Experts in Team, and it's actually it's been, how long has it been going for? It's been
15 years.
15 years. So now, so we bring into the Art Academy, we bring engineers, scientists, geographers, and basically turn them into artists within 3 weeks. So I think this is a good initiative, and it's ongoing, and so we're doing like 3 of these modules every year, and we have always a certain subject matter, and it is very much about critical reflection. So the subject matter was north by northeast, and this free passage from Norway to China. So what will happen when the ice melts. And so, yeah, tackling these sort of societal issues, but through an art project and through artistic thinking.
And also experts in the team is mandatory for all students, regardless of which program. If you're in art, if you're in engineering, if you're in music, if you're in society, in religion, it's mandatory for every student.
And how about you, Deborah? How is the museum promoting this? Because the museum doesn't only address those that are students, but the general public and the PhD fellows, as you mentioned. How do you tackle these competences?
Curiosity is at the heart of actually, curiosity and creativity are actually two of our values in the museum. I think that it's a complex answer. I think bridging across, becoming used to taking ideas on a journey across the different disciplines and across different intergenerational groups, whether they belong within the education system or within the general public, is really important. But I would also say that collaborative and community belong together for us as well, and to really, what I didn't mention is that the museum has a very proactive First Nations policy, and we have a reconciliation action plan that is going on. And when we move to the new museum, we will be in a community that's very different from where we are right now. And in that community, there's 150 languages being spoken. And where I come from in New Zealand, the National Museum is a bicultural museum, and the entire country is becoming more and more bicultural. And so there is a need to balance Māori and what we would call Pākehā, which is New Zealand European, into balance with each other. This means that it's not just curiosity, but it's kind of like a respect that operates around different ways that we might conceive of the world and how we might conceive of what actually knowledge is. And that the critical frameworks under which we might analyse something actually change hugely if you enable voices that may not usually be heard in relation to those critical issues, especially when it comes to some of those sustainable goals. So I'll leave
Thank you. And on this side of the table, any input?
Maybe my experience in my project, I tried to foster new competencies in the students, because also in the project I just presented, I involved students from different disciplines. So, for one hand, we had help the student, the so-called STEAM students, to approach art, to approach also the way to realize an artwork. Also. And for the other hand, the students of fine arts, because I usually work also with students of fine arts from the academy, to approach the new technologies, to approach the science. And also, it's for both sides. It's a way to have a new knowledge, to have a piece of new knowledge outside of their path of study. Because especially in Italy, it's a very narrow, the part of study. So that's is a way to see something different. And I think it's a way to foster the new competencies. And also in my new project that I'm designing at the University of Bologna in collaboration with the UCD, University College Dublin, I wanted to also to add another part of the project in which students from different disciplines, students of art and so on, can have the chance to work for a bit, to work together, to realize or to think about how to face a challenge to realize an artwork and in connection with the science, technology, and so on. So that's.
Maybe I could give many examples, but I was thinking about some things that happened last year in École Polytechnique. I would say some young students, PhD students, they could be a little skeptical about these artists that were coming in residency, or well, about the aim of this art science projects. And what happened is that we had a student, artist student as an intern from École des Beaux-Arts, and she became friends with a PhD physicist in hydrodynamics, who was studying water droplets in calefaction, like very high temperature. And she had started a research by observe the shapes and the reaction of the water drops. But then this young artist, she arrived and she said, have you ever registered the sound of each water drops, and how it changes depending the size and all this? And what happened is that it totally changed the research of the young scientists. And on the same way, this artist, she made some music, a piece of music about that. So really, it was maybe exploring unexpected ways that can happen. Bon, I could give many other examples.
Yeah, from my past, I know that there are two speeds of learning and doing things, which probably apply not only to technology but also to, in general, to the way we approach creative things. It would be wrong to position everything, and that's a bit of a danger today. Everything within the role of the institution of learning and developing and doing things like that. So it would be more interesting, I think, to let each go on their own speed in it, which you see very much. In school they have to sit down, the kids, and it's going very slow for them, and very boringly. The speed of learning is very boring for somebody. But they go at home and they are very fast in certain other things, including their creative development. Now, since we are sitting in this library, there's a reason why we are there. We participate in a lot of events. The library has also now these Fab Labs and Makers Lab and co-creation spaces, etc. And they have 3,000 visitors a day. So it goes from very young to very old. So whatever we do, we try to connect with activities and festivals that happen in the entrances of the library. And then we show what we're doing and things like that. And we try to invite people too in our own labs. What is interesting in this respect is that also the multiculturalism that you deal with, and Ghent is a very multicultural city. There's about, it's not a big city, it's probably 800,000 people, but it has, I think 250,000 come from Central and Eastern Europe. There's a lot of North African, Turkish backgrounds and things like that. So now the library started to have books in different languages, and also they have this robot lab down in the Fab Lab, and also they have all these games and other things that they do, and they can have it in several languages. So I think it's interesting what's happening now. For the students and the researchers, it's no problem. You organize seminars, you do workshops, you do think tanks, you invite other people, and they're satisfied. And they come even in with their own ideas. I think if we step out of that and we look at, and I think this is the challenge, what is happening. When I said about the change of technology, the same is happening at this moment, I think. What I said already, and what I heard already from a couple of times, with different kind of a network. Now the governments in all these countries here is retreating from subsidizing culture. You see that there's a lot of do-it-yourself network starting. And the question would be how we deal with it in the light of school. Piaget said school is like, you have the difference between assimilation and accommodation. And a school will always, that's Piaget who said it, not me. A school is so slow because they only accommodate. Yeah? So they don't change. It's like the parasite sits on the outside and the whale is going on. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we have a worm in our stomach that we become thin and have to, and that was for Pia. It's an interesting difference, and the question I think is how do we deal with it in the future? Do we invest in getting this very slow process of institutional change and see this as the main kind of a thing, or shall we just limit this to to a certain extent, and invest more on how people deal with technology in their personal lives. You see what's happening with the virus and so on. So what is to be expected? Well, a kind of a social breakdown, social distancing that is happening.
Before proceeding, you were saying that Piaget said that schools on one side foster accommodation. Sir Ken Robinson has an incredible video that I invite you all to see that claims that schools kill creativity. So for what I understand, you're dealing with audiences above, I would say, 16 years old. But till then, the children in this case has already gone through this educational pathway that, according to Sir Ken Robinson, has killed their creativity. So what can be done in order to boost again the curiosity and the creativity?
Last year we made an installation together with, there were two PhD students made a study about what child hears in the belly of the mother. And they worked with an artist, two sound artists, and they made a kind of a regeneration of what the exact things are. And then there's this, the Spiegel is a children's theater from Antwerp, and they came to us and they said, we want to build an environment where people can experience this. So we built this together with them, with all of them. We built this environment that is traveling to everywhere where babies are till. And so it was very interesting. We did research in the lab to check how kids react to what these artists made. It was pretty interesting. So you have to start from there, I think. I think there should be many more initiatives going up. It's not true 16, because in the Fab Labs, that sometimes kids 6, 7 years old.
Okay.
So, and then also at home, all these games that are there for under and over, we try to bring them to another kind of things, more creative ones, connected to music and the body and more tactile things.
Tactile things.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that actually what I didn't mention is that the museum deals with, when I said it, the word intergenerational, it's dealing with all age groups, and the education area in the museum is very interesting. It's dealing with around 70,000 students per annum, and that doesn't count the under school age
because you
visitors.
said in your presentation that the powerhouse will act also as a facility, right, for education.
Yeah, so they have this area called the lab, and in that they run lots of kind of experimental, I would say quite experimental programs. And one of the university research projects is, there's 2 research projects at the moment that have been funded through this ARC linkage initiative, which is to do with developing new pedagogies for use in the museum that breaks away from the way that schools will teach curriculum areas. And one of them is around, what if we break the teacher as the expert and the students as like passive learners, to actually also look at the design of the space. And so they're working with architects and furniture designers, as well as with teachers, schools, museums, to re-look at the actual environment in which learning is happening, and that if one changes how the pedagogy is operating, what does that do in terms of the styles of learning, and creating more of a co-learning space. And the other project that we're looking at the moment is a climate empowerment project, where when we're talking about climate change, there's a lot of anxiety in youth, and that when the students come, they want to teach into this area, but they don't want to trigger so much anxiety. So we're kind of looking at different ways of viewing the environment in which you are perceived as being interdependent rather than the human as separate. So sort of a little bit of influence of post-humanist thinking, but looking at how one might imaginatively work in that space. So really playful and really kind of experimenting and really kind of trying to push out so that teachers do not perceive that the museum is somewhere where they will have their curriculum delivered to them.
So you're saying that education setting has to more than just the head. It has to be head, heart, and hands, like a full body experience.
Yes, and the power is shared.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
I would open now the questions to the audience. If okay, Greg, can you?
If I can, because I have a related question, and then no, it's because again we were talking about fertile places, and fertile places, fertility is. It comes out moisture. I mean, and we had Evan talking about this recycling space, which was really interesting because it was like a free area of and I do have this feeling that each time I go to a fab lab, I enter a space where I see some exercise. So there is the 3D printing. So what could I do with 3D printing and stuff? And so, and you were talking about, Guy, a space that is not institutional, that is like free. Yes, I mean, I think we talk about this fertile place inside the school, where there are some random stuff where just the students and maybe the professor as well can just do some kind of wild endeavor.
But we tackle it in a different way. Eh? So during the week, the researchers are doing their experiments in the lab, and so there's a lot of activity happening on that side. And then when I'm there, what I do is I keep the evenings and weekends open for artists who come. And these are sometimes professional artists who want to work out a couple of things. So that is what I mean, that they can ask, and if some people ask some things you don't want to. So you need to be you're a facilitator. So it's like facilitating something that you think is valuable, not only for what is happening as a background, but that there is some activities happening outside that are generated by outside and that can use what is there, what is inside. I think that's the best, because the people who run these places, they come too. Sometimes I found them back, my colleagues, in the weekend, because I said, this one is coming or this one, and they come to help. So there is a possibility of getting away from this closed lab to something open.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, so in the Artec seminar series, we carried out a few theatre of making events, and that was where we did these 2-day events at the Trondheim Academy of Art, and we brought together young adults, and we basically had musical instrument designers, so EMG, so taking body signals, and then a choreographer, modular synthesis, singing, and we then basically rotated groups of students, so 6 per expert, let's say. And then we got into a jam session, and they were durational. So we did like 6 to 8 hours of just like this situation, a bit coming out of jazz in a sense, and setting up situations where it was working, and then it fell apart. And then, okay, we've got to recable things, we have to learn new movements. But everything was like getting into this flow situation. And even the design of the space we did together. Everything, we went into the space, we built everything up, and this jam went on for basically 2 days. And it was really quite a magic moment. And it is a different type of education, because they embody your confidence by performing together. And we live stream everything, so we're reaching also outside of Trondheim. We're really wanting people to become part of it. And then the people who are on the stream can actually interact with us as well in the performance.
That seems very interesting. We have a question over here.
I don't know if it's a question. I was not nervous when I was up there. And at this moment, I feel I have sweaty hands and my heart is bouncing. Because although I appreciate so much this whole setting and that we're being brought together, I really appreciate it. But we've been locked up in this room for 2 days. We have not set the example. And I'm just wondering, what would have happened if you had invited artists to co-create this meeting for the past 2 days because I'm really emotional in a way that we are not setting the example, and I think it is time to break down this way of learning because my head is full. I cannot listen to any one of you anymore, and I'm ashamed.
That's a pity.
I feel very ashamed because I want to listen to you, but it's just not there anymore, and we haven't been moving. We've only been into our heads, not into our bodies. So we need to change this if we want to get next generations into this co-creation, really.
Yeah. So again, I think we have to have an experience that really engage head, heart, and hands. So learning can be perhaps, and everything in between can be more effective. Ariane, you have a question?
We'll do a theatre of making all together.
Ariane, do you have a question?
More like a comment.
Can you speak to the microphone, please?
Thank you. It's better if I put it here than there, yeah.
Yeah.
What I found very powerful was the weekend and using the 104, that you had the presentations there. However, I'm not sure that we made the most of it because I was very energized by all these other young people doing their breakdancing trainings that they were doing. And I was very energized by talking with the artists who were presenting their projects, but I think we had two worlds. So I don't know how we could have done more to connect with the young people who were there doing other things so that they could discover the power of these kind of initiatives that you've been setting up. So I think we're getting there because we're going out and not just, I agree with what you're saying, but we're not just doing it here. We have within this 4 days done something else, but maybe not enough. We should do more in that direction. That's one. The other is when we're talking about supporting next generations, I was struck in conversations during the coffee hour that some artists were saying, we're talking so much about technology, but what about the other sciences? They were referring to wishing to work with physicists, with mathematicians. And when you were presenting, Andrew, then you said we're the School of Technology and Science, although on the label it's actually Science and Technology, and all your examples afterwards were technology, and maybe because it's already taken form, but I think there were missing opportunities that are there that we could be taking advantage of more, and I would like that. My third point is I was struck by Evans talking about the students coming in to MIT, having in their high school time been very involved in the arts. And then when we go into the university, we have to choose. We have to get into a department. And when I found that's even worse later in organizations, then they completely hide the fact that they may have had in the past some artistic engagement and it's no longer brought into their workspace. So how can we break down these barriers that get added upon layer in school? It starts in university, it hardens, and by the time they get into companies, it's really tight. So how can we work more with that? If we're looking, I think the generations are there. How do we support it? How do we keep seeding? How do we keep watering what's potentially there?
Does anyone in the tables want to address these comments?
Yeah, I think didn't we invent the humanities for that? Okay, we make them digital now, digital humanities. But and you have there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of things getting together, lately. I'm just afraid of that if we don't invest more in different technologies that we see happening already on the large scale, that we lose more and more and more of the curiosity and the creativity. If I sit on a bus and all these kids have these, they're connected to somebody else elsewhere the whole time. I sit on the train, people are reading, wow, my God, and watching pictures and things like that. So there's already, and then also even in personal life. I have a colleague in the communication, which is sitting 2 desks further, and she's doing research into this dating online. Yeah. That's curiosity and creativity. So we create already on the social and society level all this kind of distant possibilities that we can only try to bring them back and make a kind of it's not about showing information and even interaction on that level. It's having experience. It's about experience that you create in technology. It's not about technology. It's about the development of technology to create experience. And I think we get them back if we can do that.
Yeah, but to create experience, it's true that I said design can be a good link between art and science, but also humanities could be the last angle of the square or the triangle, because, for example, useful fiction, the fact to have a choreographer, an anthropologist, and like the fifth group, they created a witch circle at the end of the week to gather around scientists, artists, designer, and to engage our body also elsewhere, to talk about what has been creating during the Long Week Symposium. So probably to not forget, you have to play, to innovate, and to engage your body can help, because otherwise after a few hours or few days sitting, we don't think well and we cannot learn the same way.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
If I could just-
Andrew,
Okay, sorry, Andrew. And then one more question, because we are nearly the time.
I think your comments are really right, because we are not, in fact, taking our own medicine. We're talking about it, but we're not using it. However, as an engineer, again, this for me has been a very, very different experience. And I would agree with Ariana. I was 2 days at the Centre Chaire, and all my energy came from the breakdancers, and all of a sudden I was in the middle of a theater performance. I think I was a prop. There was improvised theater, there was everything. That was really inspiring. I think the performances were inspiring. Some of the artists could have made a little bit more effort to be inspiring, because they were actually not communicating to me and Ariana and the others that were there. They were communicating to the local people of Paris, I suppose. That was the intention, right? And then having panels here with discussions is also quite new. I don't know entirely which community it comes from. It's not very dominant in the engineering where I come from. We usually have one presentation, 2 questions, next one presentation, 2 questions. So we've been doing a little bit. And your comments, which are so valuable, I think, it's like putting up a little smash for Hugh, who's going to discuss the future. What do we do now? Right? Now we've started, we've kicked it off, we've been through this wonderful program, we've seen the artist. What's next? What do we do now? How do we take this one step further?
Okay. Last question here.
We speak about supporting the next generation, but we work at the lab a lot with also elderly people. 65 to 85. And what we discover is, and I can tell for a lot of people who want to innovate with digital and say, work with elderly people. Why? Because it's not a matter of capacity for most of them. It's a matter of, in fact, they often find all the excuse not to use digital technologies because they don't think that it's trustful, that it's meaningful, and that has impact in their real life. And when you're able to cope with this, what they require, in fact, it works really well with the young generation. And for me, when we speak about supporting the next generation, I think it's also interesting to make the link of what is the experience of the older generation in terms of meaning, in terms of knowledge, and how we can make the bridge between the creativity of the new generation and all this interesting knowledge of the oldies.
Thank you.
Yeah, my mother is 85 and I live 1,000 kilometers away from her, so we have to use technology to communicate. And lately she said to me, she said, yeah, it's really something for us old people. It's nice and slow, this internet.
That's great. Okay, my last comment or provocation for all of you on this table. We have a speaker that is head of failure. And some people claim that fail is the first attempt in learning. Do you think we should all start having a head of failure within our institutions to foster this constant exploration and disruptive way of doing things, and even perhaps having more engaging events where ideas and creativity can emerge?
And new projects also.
And new projects, of course.
I could say a word ahead of failure. I don't know, but I think that's very important to document what doesn't work. Also, for example, in collaboration, maybe artists can have the feeling to have been used for aesthetic purpose only, or scientists for only their technological knowledge. It can happen, or the resistance that can appear. But of course, like to try to fail. For example, talking about kids during the behavioral matter symposium that Manuel Frère talked about yesterday, that was organized at St. Georges Pompidou. While there was this workshop, we organized also 40 sessions with kids over 8 years old to play and to create some little robots, thanks to a very simple robotics kits with Velcro that can be attached, and we asked them to do behavioral behavioral objects imitating nature. And of course, they failed at the beginning. They didn't know what to do, and they tried. And it was a very good example of how can invention and creativity can form, like by playing, but by thinking, also by experimenting, and by failing, of course.
Thank you.
Just a few words about my experience, but the failures can be an opportunity because of my experience. For example, the project I presented, when I set up the project, I wanted to invite artists and not work with students, but I discussed with the rector, but we didn't have enough budget to do that, so I decided to do that with the students of art, and this is an opportunity because I discovered a new way to do that. I discovered that the students are very open to interact with the other, and that was a very good experience because I want to do that in other projects. So the failure was an opportunity in these fields and this very small experience.
Thank you.
You could make a book about all the good failures we.
I don't really make a difference with failure. I just think there should be a bit more messiness and spontaneity and non-virtuosic practices. So maybe that's what. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that if one pays attention, success is due to failures, and I recently just edited a book called Success and Failure, where we brought in contemporary practitioners to talk about the importance of failure as part of the pathway to success, using archives in the collection, because none of the items that are in our collection just came from nowhere. They came from a succession of failed attempts and experimentation, and that failure actually needs to be celebrated, not denied or not talked about or not played with.
Not even hidden that it was happened most of the times. I really thank you all for your contributions. You just do it? Okay.
Failure. No, well, my colleagues are doing research into, for instance, jazz musicians who play together, or any musicians who play together, and the word failure doesn't really appear there because it's part of the performance and the synchronization and the gestures and all the kind of things. So I believe also, like you say, we shouldn't all come here. We should, if you connect, I'm very interested for that matter in connected performances. Things that don't necessarily have to bring people so much together in a thing, but can let them work on different levels and allows more for failure than the physical presence. Yeah. So the future is all failure, but also presence.
Great. So let's all fail to succeed in the future, and thank you all for your participation.